All right, Joe. Well, I'm really excited to have you here. And just for everyone listening in, we are recording this on Father's Day. So this is just like a little example of what a grinder Dr. Joseph Wu, or Joe, as we're going to call him today, is. So, Joe, I want to start with a question. And I love sort of the backstory, and I actually know the answer to this, but I want to hear your version of it. So, I believe that you moved here at age 9 from Taiwan. You grew up in LA, but your family had a orchard farm in Central Valley, California. You were the quote manager of the farm between ages 13 and 21 because your dad spoke no English. But the interesting thing that I was reading about is that you originally had dreams of being a pilot or astronaut. You're now a cardiologist and a professor, among many other things. What changed between age 21 and today?
So, Aaron, so thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show. I think, as you pointed out, I was born in Taiwan and we left when I was about 8 and a half. And we actually went to South America for about a year and a half. So I came here when I was at exactly 10 years old back in 1981. And in South America, we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, Asuncion, Paraguay, and then La Paz, Bolivia. And so when we came here, my dad had a pear apple farm in Central Valley, California. It's somewhere in Delano, Ducor area. And as you mentioned, he spoke no English. And so I was the de facto manager of the farm. And every time when I call up people who are involved in the fertilizers, in the irrigation, in the ranch hand, I have to represent myself as Mr. Wu. And a lot of times when I show up in person, here Mr. Wu is actually a little kid who represented himself as Mr. Wu. But that gave me a lot of experience in terms of trying to organize things and also talking to people who are quote unquote superiors to me. And so to this day, I have no qualm with talking to people who are much more senior, much more older than me. And so, as you pointed out, when I was a kid, I had wanted to be a pilot. But then I started wearing glasses at a very early age, maybe around the age of 7 or 8. And I was actually first kid in my class to wear glasses. So I always had that self-doubt that, hey, what's wrong with me? And then when I started wearing glasses, it also occurred to me that there's no chance I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And so I gave up that dream. But then more recently, we were lucky to be able to send some of the heart cells that my lab generated and send it up to space. So, as fate would have it, 40 years later, I was able to somewhat accomplish what my childhood dream is.
Well, that's a great story, and I'm sorry that you weren't able to, but I'd argue that maybe the higher power that put you on this planet knew that you are destined for bigger, maybe more impactful from a societal perspective, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. And I would like to dive into that a little bit that, life does have a way of coming full circle. In 2016, NASA reached out and said, hey, can you help work with us? We do want to make space travel safer for humans. I know you touched on what that was, but give us a little bit more of, why did they pick you and what were some of the broader suggestions that you made to them to help space travel safer?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer that God has a plan for every one of us. And so I've learned not to, quote unquote, complain too much if things don't turn out my way. But with regard to the NASA, so back in 2016, we got picked to send what we call human iPSC, so induced pluripotent stem cell cardiomyocyte. Essentially, it's a technology in which we could take your blood, and from your blood, we generate it into your stem cells. And from your stem cells, we can then differentiate it into your heart cells, your beating heart cells. And so back in 2016, we sent the beating heart cells to space and we recover it afterwards. We want to see what is the effect of space travel is. And then in 2020, we sent 3D engineered heart tissues. The 2016 was 2D, in which the cells are on the plate. The 2020, we sent the 3D chunk of human heart muscles. And then in 2023, we sent 3D organoids, cardiac organoids, treated with and without drugs to mitigate the effect of space travel. I'm actually, and again, this gets back to my root of interest in space travel, interest in space in general. I'm actually a firm believer that in the future, people will be traveling in space, maybe in my grandkids' lifetime. And when you travel in space, there are three key issues that you need to address. One is the effect of microgravity. The other one is the effect of cosmic radiation. And then the third one is the hibernation. Hibernation means that if you travel from one planet to another planet and it takes you 10 years on the spacecraft to get there, well, you don't have that many 10 years of in your lifetime, and therefore you got to be able to go into a space capsule and come out, and if you only age a couple months rather than 10 years. But the one that we sent out in 2016, 2020, and 2023 was really to look at the effects of microgravity or minimal gravity and how that affects the heart. And this is going to be a big issue. And so, well, right now we're analyzing the data from our third travel and third set of travel, and we're trying to figure out what drugs can be used to mitigate the adverse cardiovascular effects of microgravity or space travel.
Well, thank you. My mind is kind of blown just thinking about all those things. And I guess you've seen it in movies, but I never really thought about the possibility of hibernation, right? Animals do it. I think they've shown it in movies, but we haven't seen it actually in practice. I want to talk a little bit about something that you are doing. I don't know where you find all the time to do these things. Well, I guess we're doing this on Sunday and Father's Day.
Sunday.
So you make the time, which kudos to you. But you run something called the Stanford Drug Discovery Symposium, SDDS for short. And I believe my friend Jason Kreitz, who introduced me to you, attended one last year. This is a huge event, and you really do it at low cost, right? You invite all of these amazing people across the healthcare industry. Tell us a little bit more about how did this come to be and what is it and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so this is an annual event, and it's always the last Monday and Tuesday of April. And essentially, we bring the key stakeholders of drug discovery, the CSO, CMOs, CEO of Big Pharma, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, people from academia, people from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and also venture capital angel investors. Two-day meeting, we talk about how do we accelerate drug discovery. And I think for the audience here who may not be so familiar, for the lay public, it's oftentimes quoted that it'll take you 10 to 15 years and about 1 to 2 to 3 billion dollars develop a drug from the R&D, from research development all the way to approval. And there's a lot of waste involved. There's a lot of misses involved. And because of all these misses, whenever you have a hit, you need to recuperate all the costs from your misses. And therefore, a lot of times in the US, especially when the drug gets approved, the price of the drug is quite high and it's not affordable. And just give you a perspective, for example, for some of the gene therapy drugs or gene therapy that has been approved, the cost could go anywhere from 500,000 even to up to $2 million. I believe the most expensive one is $2 million, and it's a gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. So anyway, the purpose of the meeting is to bring in everybody together and to figure out how do we cut down the red tape, how do we cut down the waste, and how do we get a drug to the market faster, cheaper, and have the drug be more effective, and so that it benefits our patients, benefits our healthcare delivery, and benefits mankind. So we've been doing this, and next year will be our 10th year, and I would encourage your audience members to come and attend the meeting.
I definitely plan to be there next year, and I've heard of it before, but I am so grateful that there's someone like you that is convening these people across the healthcare industry and making sure that we are eliminating the red tape because it is expensive and the cost of healthcare just keeps getting more and more expensive. So we need more programs like this. The other thing I want to talk about, and this loops back a little bit to what you were talking about in space, but I think also ties into the drug discovery. You and I on our prep call, we're talking a little bit about your lab in Stanford and the fact that you're able to take patients' blood cells, convert them into stem cells, and from there, I believe you can grow them into heart cells. And I think you even mentioned maybe other organ cells, brain and liver. So, one, how did you come up with this idea? And two, tell us a little bit about what the purpose is for doing this. I think clinical trials is one of the things that you were talking about, and precision medicine was the other.
Yeah. So I came in 2004 after I finished my training, and at that time, there were few people working with the human embryonic stem cells, and mainly because of the limitation with our former President George Bush, he had a ban on working with human embryonic stem cells. And then around 2006, 2007, there was a scientist whose name is Shinya Yamanaka. And he figured out that you could just take a patient's blood or a patient's skin and transfect the blood or the skin with four different genes and convert these skin or blood cells back into your embryonic stem cell. Okay, and so this is revolutionary because for the audience here, you just need to remember there are three stem cell type, the three major stem cell type. One is what we call adult stem cell. Adult stem cell means the stem cells that we have in our body, but as we get older, these adult stem cells poop out. And so the analogy would be if you have a 5-year-old kid who broke her bone, like my daughter, she broke her forearm bone, and it's gonna heal by itself. But whereas the same person at age 80, it's not gonna heal, and then the doctor would need to put in screws and so forth. And that's because the bone stem cells kind of pooped out between age 5 to age 80. The second one is the human embryonic stem cell that I alluded to earlier. Essentially, lets your dad's sperm, your mom's egg mix together. It becomes a fertilized embryo. Inside the fertilized embryo, there's what we call inner cell mass that you can culture. And this embryonic stem cell, you can then become brain, heart, liver, kidney, all the cell types in your body. Obviously, you and I no longer have human embryonic stem cells anymore because we used it all up to become you and me. And then the third one is this induced pluripotent stem cell that I just mentioned that was discovered by Dr. Yamanaka. He, by the way, got the Nobel Prize in 2012 for this discovery, exactly 6 years after this discovery. As I mentioned, you take your patient's blood or skin and then hit it with four different genes to transform it back into your embryonic stem cell state. And now with your iPSL, we can then figure out how do you add different growth factors or different chemicals to make your brain cells, to make your heart cells, to make your liver cells, to make your kidney cells, to make your muscle cells, essentially any cell type in your body. And so we started working on that as soon as his paper came out in 2006. And so we've been working on this concept of induced pluripotent stem cell over the past 20 plus years. At Stanford, we've also built the world's largest single center of a biobank of human iPS cell lines. So we have recruited more than 2,500 patients, generated the iPS cells, and banked them. And we make these iPS cells available to all the scientists in the US so that when somebody is interested in spinal muscular atrophy, we have those cells. When somebody is interested in Alzheimer, we have those cells. When somebody is interested in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, we have those cells. Within my lab, because I'm a cardiologist, we focus quite a bit on different kinds of genetic heart diseases that you can then take these iPS cells, differentiate the heart cells, study them, and understand the mechanisms, come up with new drugs so that these drugs can then be used to treat these patients. Otherwise, it's not possible for me to biopsy my patients, study their heart muscle cells after biopsy because that's a very invasive procedure. And most of the time, the patients will not say yes, and it's also not a reimbursable procedure. So I think this has been a game changer in terms of understanding first the disease biology, and the second, once you understand the disease biology, you can then start screening for drugs to see what drugs work and what drugs do not work. And then third, give it back to the patient. It's almost like a precision medicine, right? And then the last thing what we do is that we also do it on a larger scale. Large scale meaning tested on 100 patients, 200 patients, 500 patients at a time. In that case, we're doing something to the equivalent of running a clinical trial. But now instead of running a clinical trial in patients, we're running a clinical trial on your stem cells in a dish. So that's why we call it clinical trial in a dish that we're pretty well known for.
I love this. Two things. One, I like the term pooped out, right? I think that's a very good technical term that you use, that our stem cells pooped out. Uh, is there a world, and we'll talk a little bit more about the future in a minute, but is there a world where we could start to think about taking these cells and growing them into actual organs? Is that something that you would explore? Could I replace my heart in 20 years because my heart, has an issue?
Yeah, so that's what we're hoping for. And some of my colleagues at here at Stanford are trying to work on a 3D printed heart. But right now, probably the initial step is to see on a easier timeline, which is whether you can inject patients with stem cells. And that's why a lot of people are using stem cell-based therapy for Parkinson's disease. There's a clinical trial going on. We at Stanford, we have a human embryonic stem cell-based cardiomyocyte for heart therapy. And then there's also stem cell-based therapy for diabetes, for muscle disease, and so forth. But to build the entire 3D human heart and put that 3D human heart, that's going to take a long time because the human heart is actually quite complex, and it's got the muscle, it's also got the electricity, the conduction system, and it's got the blood flow. It's almost like thinking about building a house. You had the motor, you had the bricks, you had the electricity, you had the pipe, and everything all need to be aligned perfectly well. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So I think that would take more time than the simplest step, which is right now putting in the initial component, putting in the bricks, so putting in the cells into the heart and to see how that works.
What you're saying is we'll have this process done by next year.
It's,
Not that fast.
science always takes time, and this is also part of the reason why some of us are quite worried in terms of what's going on right now in the scientific field, in terms of the funding situation.
It is unideal for sure. And I'm sorry that that's the case. But thank goodness for people like you. And so, one of the things I do want to touch on, the premise of this show is people who are influential. And in some cases, they're people who are actors or musicians or directors, and they put good into the world. You're someone that your job is inherently putting good into the world, but you could be satisfied with just being a cardiologist or just being a professor or just leading your symposium. You took on this other fairly big role last year, I think from June 20th, 2023 to June 2024, of being the president of the American Heart Association. Let's talk a little bit about the mission of the American Heart Association, and then I'll do a follow-on question after that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think it was quite an honor and privilege to be asked to be the American Heart Association president during our centennial. I think the AHA was set up back in 1924, and last year it was exactly 100 years. And I think my hunch is that the AHA was probably looking for a physician scientist like me, somebody who's a doctor and also a scientist who could straddle both areas quite well. So the AHA is a nonprofit organization. It's focused on fighting heart disease and stroke. Heart disease, it's the number one killer in the U.S. And I think stroke is considered, the number two worldwide. There are actually a lot of stroke incidents in different parts of the world. And we are a volunteer organization that's dedicated to educating the public on healthy living. The AHA also fund scientific research. We give out about 180 million to 200 million dollars per year to fund scientific research. It is the second largest funder of scientific research outside of the National Institute of Health. The AHA also advocate for policies that improve brain and heart health. The AHA, as you know, also provide training in CPR to kids and to adults and throughout the whole world. So it is a fantastic organization, and I do hope that many of your listeners would consider joining the AHA as a volunteer member of the American Heart Association.
And if you don't do that, maybe give some money because it is doing good.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about that and the fact that what did the responsibilities of being the president look like? And by the way, I am guessing they probably didn't just pick your name out of a hat for the centennial position, but what did a day in the life look like on top of your already busy schedule?
Well, as I mentioned, it's quite an honor, and I think you have some of the responsibilities. Essentially, You help out the AHA with its scientific and clinical missions. You also travel quite a bit to different meetings. And because you want to be a global ambassador, you're representing the AHA brand. And you also provide some of your opinions and expertise, your experience in terms of guiding and shepherding where the organization should go. And so, for example, I'll just give you one example. When I was the AHA president, I truly, truly believe that we should fund more trainees, our future generation of doctors and scientists who are interested in research in the cardiovascular diseases. So I was able to, cajole the AHA into putting in more money into funding our young scientists.
Thank you again for doing that. And, again, folks, volunteer, donate. It is a great organization. I've actually done some work on their behalf in the past, so I can vouch for that. I do want to ask you one more question that is forward-looking. It's professional, and then we'll get into some more lighthearted questions. These are meant to get to know you a little bit better as a person. So if we looked into the future, I know we talked about the idea of 3D hearts, we talked about the idea of space travel. What do you see sort of coming over the next 5 or 10 years, maybe particularly in the world of cardiology?
Yeah, I think AI definitely is going to be a major component, and I think AI is going to change a lot of how we practice medicine, because at the end of the day, we as doctors, we can't remember everything, right? Whereas AI never forgets, and so you could imagine in the future going to a clinic in which a doctor talks to you. But right now, instead of the doctor taking notes, the AI is taking notes in the background. And afterwards, the AI spits out the encounter between you and the doctor. And the doctor looks at it and signs off and says, I agree. You, as a patient, also has a copy of that interaction. That's one example. Another example would be a lot of times when you showed up in the hospital, in the clinic, and especially for the patients who have many, many different comorbidities, many, many different diseases, in which the medical record chart is like, it could be, you could put it into 5 different books and so long that it's just not possible for the doctor to go through all of that. You can imagine that the AI could go through all the medical record that you've had for the past 10, 20 years and give the doctor a summary of what are the essential elements of this particular visit or what the patient needs to do. And the third example would be a lot of times that patients showed up with unknown or weird diseases, manifestation, and we just can't figure out what's going on. And the AI being able to look at all the medical records, all the patient, as well as whatever that's available in the literature, in the medical textbook, and then come up with the top 3 diagnoses of what the AI thinks the patient has. And we as a doctor would almost look at it and say, yeah, I'm not sure about number 1. Actually, number 2 makes a lot of sense. How come I didn't think about that? And I'm going to look into that. So next 5 to 10 years, this would definitely be possible much earlier than printing a 3D heart that we could put into a human. Yeah.
I like the pragmatic element of that last one as well, where to your point, you may know everything or have known everything at one point in time, but to be able to summon that memory and to cross-check it with the patient's background is brilliant. And I love the fact, because I'm a big believer, I love AI, but I do see the role of humans, especially experts, in being able to interpret that so that there aren't hallucinations. It doesn't, like Dr. Google, right? We know a lot of people go out and Google their symptoms, and some of the information out there is not the best. So I like that answer a lot. All right, so we are going to shift to some of the more lighthearted questions, and I'm a little bit curious about this with you because you're clearly one of the most brilliant people in the world, and so it's funny to ask you some of these. Starting with the first one, which is, what is the dirtiest sounding word that actually isn't dirty that, comes to mind for you?
No, that's an interesting question, but I guess I'm gonna put on my hat as a doctor, and I could probably think about 3 different words that a doctor uses that's slightly dirty, but I'll explain what they mean. One is angina, uh,
Yes, that's a
and
great one because I think about that every single time hear the word angina.
yeah, so on the medical records, you'll see the word angina pectoris, and that basically means chest pain, right? And then the other one is phonetically it sounds like mastication. mastication, right? But masticate just means chewing food. And so when we say patient has a problem with mastication, that means a patient has jaw problem. And then the third one, from a doctor researcher standpoint, is what we call penetrance, so genetic penetrance, right? Again, sounds dirty, but when we say genetic penetrance, it just means that how a particular gene is being expressed in a patient. Yeah. So, and
Joe,
Jack,
I don't think anyone's going to ever top those answers. Like you didn't just give me one good one, you gave me three really good ones, and I love the doctors out there. I know you've had a chance to meet a lot of famous people over the course of your life, and I'm sure you'll meet many more. Who out of those people you've met has impressed you the most?
yeah, so I thought about this, and I would have to say a good friend of mine. His name is Lip-Bu Tan, Lip-Bu, and then last name Tan. He's actually currently the CEO of Intel.
Yeah, I've heard of that company.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
make
I mean,
microchips or something, right?
the microchips and Intel is really essentially the pride of America's Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, I'm showing you my water bottle, by the way, that was from Intel. We worked with them as a client. So,
Yeah. And I think Intel, in the past few years, has gone through some rough, past several years, has gone through some rough times. And I think um, Lip-Bu, he was tapped to be the CEO of Intel in March 2025. And the person I know him for a variety of reasons. He's a true visionary. He's also a gentleman. He's actually an elder in his church as well. We go to different church, but I know that as well. And I'm really rooting for him that he goes in whip Intel into shape and turn it around so that we can compete with some of the other companies in the chip business world. For example, TSMC and Nvidia and other companies. Yeah, I've been impressed with him, and I really hope that he could go in turn Intel around.
well, that's a good one, and I'm pulling for him as well because I think the more competition you have, the better we all benefit, right?
Mhm.
Next one is name a band, musical band that you wished you had seen in concert.
Well, as I mentioned, I came in 1981. But I think my parents are so poor that I never had an opportunity to go to concert. But I would say I like Journey quite a bit,
Oh,
and
that's a
I
good
think
one.
the lead singer of Journey, Steve Perry. I think he probably has one of the most beautiful voices of all the band's lead singers out there. And I think, as you know, he was a lead singer for Journey back in the mid 70s and then also mid 80s and then again briefly in the mid 90s. And one of the couple songs I really love is Don't Stop Believing, and because that's essentially a very empowering message. And then the other one is Open Arms. And again, I think that's also has a special meaning, also a very empowering message.
That's a great choice. I did not peg you as a Journey guy, but I like that one as an options. And I like that you even specified the songs, great songs. What is I'm testing this one out on you, by the way. I had one that I was using and people were having a tough time with it. So I want to ask, what's the grossest thing you've ever eaten?
I'm not sure if it's that gross, but I would probably say just snake meat. They used to sell that in night markets in Taiwan, and I remember when I was a kid, my uncle took me to one of those night markets, and there's actually a live snake, and the vendor he just butchered the snake and cooked the meat and just ate it. It's actually not that bad, I would say. I would say it's probably like a mix between chicken and fish. It's got a softer texture compared to chicken, and it's slightly more fibrous texture compared to fish. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one because the process, I think, was probably the gross part, right? Seeing it live and
exactly.
then butchered and thinking about eating a snake. I've had rattlesnake before, and I agree. Describing it as a combo of fish and chicken from a texture
Yeah,
perspective is a great way to
yeah,
describe it.
yeah.
Two more questions left. So, one person you would like to meet, they could be living or they could be dead.
This one is a hard one. I think probably President Trump. And if I have the opportunity, I would give him some ideas of quote unquote, how do you make America great? And being a scientist and being a clinician, being a physician, I would say that you make America great by investing in STEM, science, technology, engineering, medicine. And that this is one of the few areas that we as a country still has an advantage, lead compared to other countries. But by cutting funding for academia, we're going to lose that advantage. So, you know, make America great by investing more into STEM, investing more into AI, into robotics, into renewable energy, into healthcare, rather than gutting STEM.
That's one of the more thoughtful answers I think I've ever heard. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the word Trump and thoughtful probably don't occur in the same sentence very often, but I love that you had that desire. You didn't choose to meet Steve Perry. You chose to meet Trump, and hopefully you do get to meet him and steer him down that direction of STEM. All right, last question. Again, knowing my goal with this show is that people who are influential, they could be CEOs, actors, musicians, doctors, but they are doing societal good. And that's where we like to lean into. Who else would you recommend that I have on the show?
I think if possible, I think you should get Bill Gates on. And
You know what? I
yeah.
love that. I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as you probably know, Bill Gates recently announced that he's going to give away most of his fortune in 2025, essentially 20 years from now. Now, you could say all you want about Bill Gates, whether you like him or you don't like him, but at the end of the day, how many people is going to give out all their assets by the time they die? And so, and the Gates Foundation, it's already given out more than $100 billion, and in the next 10, 20 years, they'll probably spend another, I don't know, $200 billion, depending on what the market is, depending on the inflation. So somebody like him, who made tons of money, but has the, I don't know, the Andrew Carnegie mentality to give it all back to the society. I have a lot of respect for that. And in addition, what he wants to do with his foundation, as I understand it, is eliminating preventable diseases that could kill mothers and children. Right? Kudos for that. Eliminating infectious diseases such as malaria and measles. Again, kudos for that. Look at all the countries in Africa and third world countries that are affected by that. And then also eliminating poverty for hundreds of millions of people. And again, kudos for that, because in the world of philanthropy, most of us want to donate money to put our name in a building. But here, he wants to eliminate poverty, and because this is a section of people that don't have strong advocates for it. So I definitely think that you should try to get Bill Gates to show up.
I'm all for it. And it is interesting because Jerry Zucker, who is the director of Airplane and Ghost, Bill Gates came up and he made the point that he may have actually saved more lives than Jonas Salk, right? Who's a pretty influential
Yeah.
scientist in our history. And so, yeah, I would be happy to have Bill Gates on the show. So we'll get right on that. With that, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time, especially on Father's Day on a Sunday. And thank you for such thoughtful answers. Thank you for all of the good that you are putting into the world. And I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully sooner than your symposium next year, but I will definitely be there one way or the other.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for being on the show, for asking me to be on your show. I had a great time, and happy Father's Day to all the listeners out there. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.